Morning, everyone. Well, I got some stuff wrong yesterday, and I'm going to correct it today, right after I show you this. So Donald Trump purposely avoids shaking Justin Trudeau's hand. And the first time I watched this, I was like, where's Trudeau? Where's Trudeau? He's in the left-hand side of the frame, and then it kind of zooms in. But Trump shakes two people's hand, and this guy, I'm not sure if this is Mark Khanna. It's a little hard to tell right now. This guy falls asleep, and it's very funny. But Trudeau is like right here. Trump shakes these guys' hands and like pointedly turns away. So have a watch, and then I'm going to correct my story from yesterday. Turns out it was a CPC event, but it's all pandering, so we're going to go through that. But let's watch Trump snub Trudeau, because it's fun. There he is. On. There he is. Look at those hands. Oh. No handshake for you, Mr. Trudeau. Look at him. I just thought it was funny. Sorry about the breathing for the person who was recording the video, but that was funny. Okay. Yesterday I reported that Mr. Scheer had some event on what appeared to be the 9th to the 10th. I guess the 9th because this was 2:32. And I thought it was a Malay Samajan event. And that's what I said. Yesterday's video talks about how Arpan Khanna tweeted this out, and then Mr. Scheer tweeted out about the Malay Samajan Golden Jubilee. And I thought, are these the same event? Like, are they doing two events in the same thing? And an intrepid researcher, somebody who watches my videos and is a friend of mine, had a look and said, look at the ceilings, they're different events. And so he did this work, not me, and he found Peter Kent tweeting about the event that Mr. Khanna was tweeting about. So they were different events. So on the 4th, Mr. Scheer was at the Malay Samajan. On the 9th, he was doing an event for the Federation of Chinese Canadian Conservatives. So, okay. In this tweet, Mr. Peter Kent says, quote, close to 1,000 turnout in Markham for CPC leader Andrew Scheer and the launch of the Federation of Chinese Canadian Conservatives. Okay, so this is a CPC event, absolutely. And look at that ceiling. You can tell that ceiling is different than this ceiling, because look at those chandeliers. You were right, sir. And so very different ceiling, a lot more Asian people in this one, which makes sense because it's the Federation of Chinese Conservatives, or Chinese Canadian Conservatives. So there you go. So I was incorrect, and as I said in my video yesterday, I am sorry. However, it's still kind of strange that Mr. Khanna says 2,000 and Mr. Kent says 1,000 for the same event, right? So Mr. Kent says close to 1,000 turnout in Markham for CPC leader Andrew Scheer, and Arpana says close to 2,000 folks supporting Andrew Scheer and the CPC HQ team in Markham last night. So momentum is building, I suppose, as Arpana Khanna is saying, but I find it really strange that I had a hard time finding information about all of these events. And it's not just the Malay event either. There was an event on the 4th in the afternoon, I guess, where Andrew Scheer says, quote, honored to join the Harayan Cultural and Sports Club of Canada for their 13th annual Harayan Night and Diwali celebration yesterday. And then he talks about Diwali. So again, I'm not trying to rip on Mr. Scheer for engaging with all of these people, but I find it interesting that I had a hard time finding information. I looked on Andrew Scheer's page, I looked on the CPC HQ page for events, and we had to find, Peter Kay's tweet about it to find out that this was the Federation of Chinese Canadian Conservatives, and it was on the 9th. So it's just a strange way to roll things out. And I wonder if it's not an event like the launch of the Federation of Chinese Canadian Conservatives, how many people are you attracting? How many cross-cultural people are you attracting? Can you fill a room like this, Mr. Scheer, with Canadians under Canada's banner instead of the Canadian Chinese Conservatives or the Diwali celebration or the Samajan Golden Jubilee? How well do you fill a room, sir? And the point isn't, I just want a comparison. How popular are you? Right? Like a barometer. Have an event. Just open it up. I'll go. I promise I'll be there. And, we'll see. So interesting to pay attention to. Let's see how this all shakes up and works out before October 2019. here is an exchange, and here's the Standing Committee on Finance, and I like the Standing Committee on Finance. These guys don't talk about anything.
You spent...
And this Twitter video interface is terrible, so I apologize. This is 6 minutes of Mr. Morneau not answering any questions. And we're going to look at a couple of interactions here. The first couple of minutes is really interesting, and then I'm going to jump ahead. So we're going to watch about 2 minutes, and then a later exchange. But Mr. Morneau never answers the question. And I'm going to put the question up, as I did last time. What is the date the construction will start? And how much more will it cost? So hold on a second while I do that. All right, here we go.
$4.5 billion of our money to buy a $2 billion pipeline under the promise that it would accelerate the expansion of that pipeline. On what date will the construction of the pipeline expansion begin?
Well, thanks very much for answering this question. It's clear that we needed to move forward in a way with the Trans Mountain Pipeline and the expansion to ensure the pipeline actually gets done. That was the conclusion we got to in purchasing that pipeline. We are working through a process to make sure that that moves forward in the right way. And as we have more detailed dates, we will certainly be providing them to Canadians.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I'm just not sure where I saw that in the budget implementation bill or the main estimates. I think we're off topic here.
When we go into the estimates, it opens it up. I've provided leeway the first time. The first series of questions were on BIA 1, but I think you can fall back on the estimates, so we'll allow them general questions as a result. Mr. Poilievre.
On what date will construction begin?
As you may know, having been sitting in the House, we're going through a National Energy Board process and seek to have meaningful consultations with Indigenous peoples. The notion of having meaningful engagement and going through that process means
the question was what date? Do you know the date?
I'm happy to respond to the question in a reasonable way if you'd like to hear the answer.
Again, I had a 5-second question that required a 1-second answer. You still haven't answered it. The question is, on what date will construction begin on the project?
If you're not interested in knowing, then that's okay.
I am.
What we're doing is we're going through a National Energy Board process in order to ensure that we deal with the issues.
Okay, and just he's such a weasel. I can't listen to any more non-answers. So hold on, we're going to jump ahead. But that is essentially the answer on what date will construction on the taxpayer-funded pipeline expansion start. The answer is we're working on it, kind of, except that we're not. And if you think back and remember back, the reason that they have to go back and consult with Indigenous leaders, etc., is because the court said you didn't even do your own bare minimum. So you being the Liberal government, created these new rules, and then you didn't follow them. And so the court said, go back and follow your rules that you created to get this to the next step. So the construction on this project was supposed to start at the beginning of the 2018 construction season. So that's March, April, May of 2018. And we're in November of 2018, and Mr. Poilievre, I'm saying that wrong, and I even brought up the Mercer report to hear how to say his name, so I'm trying, guys. But when you're in the middle of talking about it, it escapes the brain. So Mr. Poilievre is trying to hold them to task and just being shut down by these non-answers. And the chair of the committee is willing to accept the non-answers, which I think is very strange. So I'm going to jump ahead here. Hold on. Okay, here we are to the second part of the question. How much more will we need? It's more.
Ensure that we meet up to the court's direction, and at that stage we'll have more information.
So you have indicated we're going to have to spend more tax dollars to actually build the expansion. How much more will the expansion cost taxpayers? How much? The
current process, of course, is the enabling process to get to the expansion. So as we get there, we'll have more information on the exact numbers.
You don't know?
We did extensive
Do you
review.
know?
The minister is answering the question. Go ahead,
It doesn't look like it to me, but go ahead.
We did extensive review of the both operating costs and the costs for the building of the pipeline expansion in order to get to the appropriate purchase price.
Okay, so you did an extensive review. Thank you for sharing that. And what did that review show the construction would cost?
The review showed, of course, that the construction costs that had been previously outlined by the pipeline proponent were entirely reasonable from the standpoint of any price that we would pay, and that this was an economic project from Canadian taxpayers' standpoint.
You put $4.5 billion in the line to nationalize a pipeline, and you can't even tell us how much more Canadian tax dollars are going to have to be poured into this project. I would think that you would have calculated this number before putting this amount of Canadian tax money on the line. So I'm going to give you one more chance for Canadians whose money is at stake here to reassure them that you actually did your math before you put their money on the line. How much will the expansion cost Canadian taxpayers? How much?
Minister, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you for the question. In deciding to go forward with this project, we recognized that it was not only economically good for our country, allowing us to get resources to international markets, but also the project itself was economically feasible. We took a look at the current pipeline dynamics, of course, the economics to get to the price, and also the projected cost of the pipeline development. As we move through the process and get to the next iteration of the development costs, we'll be transparent about those with Canadians.
Thank you.
So all of those words to say absolutely nothing. The questions were, what date will construction on the taxpayer-funded pipeline expansion start? He said nothing. And the second question was, how much more taxpayer money will be needed to finish the pipeline, the expansion? And he says, when we get to that part, we'll look at it and then tell you, Canadians, then, maybe. Just like we're telling you now. As clearly as we're telling you now. So doesn't he look like a Will Ferrell character? Like, there are faces he makes throughout this interview that I thought, man, that's like Will Ferrell on Saturday Night Live reacting to like a bad joke, or just some of the facial expressions. And I don't know, something about his face reminds me of Will Ferrell. So what an odd way for a sitting majority government to not answer questions. What an odd thing to witness. The questions weren't complicated. The questions should have been answered before we spent $4.5 billion of taxpayer money on the pipeline expansion that was ruled you couldn't go forward through the courts. Most conservative governments, and this was said at the time, would have made the purchase contingent on it passing through those court battles, right? Like, you don't buy a pipeline that you can't start work on unless you're not really intending to ever start work on the pipeline. Oh, hey, look at our Liberal government. What an insane financial standing committee meeting. What an insane finance minister to believe that this is acceptable. It's so far below acceptable. If this was, can you imagine if you were in the private sector and your boss says, what date will the construction start? You know, John or Sally or whatever your name is. And you said, sit down, sir. This is going to take 5 to 10 minutes for me to explain. And he says, what? And you don't give him a date. At the end of all of that explaining, you don't give him a date. And everybody seems fine with that. Do you think you'd have a job? I don't think so. I don't think so. So that's our insane Liberal government. Stop the insanity. Check out the People's Party of Canada.ca. Check out Maxime Bernier. And keep watching between now and next October. We've got a decision to make, Canada. Thanks for watching.